ideal moment to get a frog in one's throat, truly. I think folks are rolling in. I see that participant number climbing up. It's fun to visualize what that would actually look like if that many people were actually streaming into a room at that moment. We'll just have a couple minutes of hanging out while folks get comfortable, checking in.
I'm gonna grab some water just in case.
Good idea. What a lovely living room. Oh, I'm just totally obsessed with the color of that couch.
Right? It looks so relaxing.
And that fan, I don't know, I'm getting big, like summery porch vibes.
Oh, and the art on the wall too.
We're just obsessing over here.
We're admiring your space.
Oh, thank you. You know, we do what we can because we're in Houston. You know, the indoors have to be pleasant because it's already hitting almost 90 and it's still spring. So it's just going to be hell on earth for a few more months. So the indoor space has to be comfortable.
Nikki wins for book backdrop, though.
Oh, well.
That's a nice library backdrop you got going on there.
Thank you very much. And there's a, you know, if you could see it, there's a cow femur just over, if you could see that, we're kind of like, wait, where is it? Okay, I
can actually, yes.
Yeah.
I would expect nothing
there
less,
it is,
Nikki.
Nothing
less.
Thank you.
Real badass.
Thank you very much. Which I got at a drugstore in Houston.
Fantastic.
Houston's where you got to go for the interior decor. It seems like
I got the bone and a used pair of cowboy boots at that store. They were really good boots. I wore the hell out of them.
Perfect.
That seems Texan to me.
Cavenders?
You go in a store, you leave with a cow femur or something.
Yeah, exactly.
Amazing.
That's funny.
Well, it's a couple minutes after 7 now, so I think I'll go ahead and kick us off here, and some more folks will stroll in as they do. I've got my top of the hour statements to run through, and then we'll start talking about poems. Okay?
Sounds good.
Cool. Well, good evening, everyone, and happy National Poetry Month. Thank you for joining us tonight to celebrate these three incredible poets, Nicky Beer, Hayan Charara, and Brian Tierney. My name is Bailey. I'm an associate editor here at Milkweed Editions, and I'm so pleased to welcome you all to this very special reading, which will be followed by a Q&A. Excuse me. If you're not familiar with Milkweed Editions and you're joining us for the first time, welcome. We are a literary nonprofit publisher, and we publish books that change the way readers see the world. I'm going to begin with a few items of note before happily passing the virtual mic over to the folks you're actually all here to see. First, I'd like to give some gratitude to our fellow Kachina Yeager for writing the following land acknowledgement statement, which is also included in our printed books. Milkweed Editions is based in Bede Ota Otunwe within Minnesota Makoche, the traditional homeland of the Dakota people. Residing here since time immemorial, Dakota people still call Minnesota Makoche home, with 4 federally recognized Dakota nations and many more Dakota people residing in what is now the state of Minnesota. Due to continued legacies of colonization, genocide, and forced removal, generations of Dakota people remain disenfranchised from their traditional homeland. Presently, Minnesota Makoche has become a refuge and home for many indigenous nations and people, including 7 federally recognized Ojibwe nations. We humbly encourage you to reflect upon the historical legacies held in the lands they occupy. I'd also like to give some gratitude tonight to our senior publicist, Claire Lane, who organized this beautiful event and who is present in the chat to help you with your questions. She'll also drop the link to Nikki's, Hayan's, and Brian's books in the chat. So if you love what you hear tonight, and I'm extremely certain you will, Please do purchase copies of Real Phonies and Genuine Fakes, These Trees, Those Leaves, This Flower, That Fruit, and Rise and Float. In doing so, you are supporting independent publishing and independent artists. Plus, we have a National Poetry Month sale going on, so you can use the code Milkweed Poetry, all caps, one word, for 20% off any poetry title on our website. It's a great deal. Now, it is my immense pleasure to introduce tonight's first reader. Nikki Beer is the author of Real Phonies and Genuine Fakes. She is a bi/queer writer and the author of 2 other collections of poems, The Octopus Game and The Diminishing House, both winners of the Colorado Book Award. Her awards include a fellowship from the National Endowment for the Arts, a Ruth Lilly Fellowship from the Poetry Foundation, a McDowell Fellowship, a fellowship and a scholarship from the Bread Loaf Writers Conference, a Marywood Fellowship from Washington College, a Discovery of the Nation Award, and a Campbell Corner Prize. Her poems have been published in Best American Poetry, Poetry, The Nation, The New Yorker, The Southern Review, The Kenyon Review, and elsewhere. She's an associate professor at the University of Colorado, Denver, where she co-edits the journal, Copper Nickel.
Thank you so much, Bailey. And hello to everyone out there in Zoom land. I can't see you all, but I know in my heart that you are the most attractive, sophisticated audience I have ever read my work in front of. It's an absolute pleasure to be here reading with Hayan Charara and Brian Tierney, and I am so proud to be pressmates with them on Milkweed. And so I'll start off by reading the first poem from Real Phonies and Genuine Fakes. As you can see, it's got a double pop image of Dolly Parton on the cover. So this first poem is, in a roundabout way, about Dolly. And it starts off with an epigraph from the lady herself, and she is talking about her drag impersonators. And she says, "Some of them look more like me than I do." So this is Drag Day at Dollywood. Blue beehives whirl and loopily ascend long paper wands. Candied apples smash into shades of vixen, strike me pink, cherries in the snow. Lamé by the square mile ripples under the Tennessee sun. From a distance, the mountain sidewinder looks like a drunk, bejeweled caterpillar. The screams sound the same as on any other day. By closing time, 782 press-on nails will have been lost. A few contrarians bust out their best Patsies or Lorettas, dark bouffants stippling the deluge of blonde. Someone's great aunt comes as Kenny Rogers and strokes her beard like a newly adopted lapdog. A bus from Atlanta unleashes 24 dollies in matching bowling jackets, gutter queens sprawled across their backs in lilac script. To relieve the boredom at the Mystery Mine line, someone hollers, "When I say homo, you say sapiens. Homo, sapiens, homo, sapiens." Dollies line the perimeter of the Bald Eagle Sanctuary, watching the raptors swoop stoically on the other side of the netted enclosure. "They mate for life," Dolly exclaims, reading from Wikipedia on her phone. "Aw," Dolly says. "Ugh," says Dolly. A tall dolly gives a short dolly a piggyback ride through Jukebox Junction, making a laughing, lumbering chimera of polysatin and fringe. Dolly holds back Dolly's hair as she vomits purple slush and kettle corn into a bank of azaleas. Dolly, with weary patience, explains to Dolly why she can't pet her service dog. Dollies grasp turkey legs in their fists, tear flesh from bone. Thousands of pairs of dolly lungs breathe in gasoline and grease, breathe out glitter. Dolly visits the restroom to check her wig and loses track of herself in the mirrors. Dolly drifts along an automated river, an undiagnosed tumor humming gently under her life jacket. Dolly holds a thumb and forefinger up to the setting sun, pinches it, and lovingly places it in Dolly's back pocket. Dolly, exhausted and sunburned, collapses onto a bench, rests her head on Dolly's breast, who rests her head on Dolly's breast, who rests her head on Dolly's breast, on Dolly's breast. This next poem is about magicians. And it's based on a book by Jim Steinmeier called Hiding the Elephant, How Magicians Invented the Impossible and Learned to Disappear. I make use of the word cenotaph in this poem, and a cenotaph is a monument to someone buried elsewhere, especially one commemorating people who died in a war. So the Vietnam Veterans Memorial Wall in DC would be an example of a cenotaph. The magicians at work. Over the years, they hunted the wayward apprentice watchmakers, the disappointing sons who transformed their surnames, hunted over acres of hinges, cogs, calluses, hidden whiskey, mustaches a breath from Farrell, poured an ocean of fortune into fabrications of brass and iron, spent entire seasons strumming massive harps of wire into perfect calibrations of invisibility, prayed to the gods of adjustable mirrors, cursed the gods of temperamental gaslights, broke the legs of imitators and thieves, chewed holes in each other's pockets, harnessed nightmares of giant silver hoops, making endless passes over the bodies of the dead, hoisted high a cenotaph for hundreds of sacrificed rabbits, breathed miles of delicate thread into the lost labyrinths of their lungs, all to make a woman float, and none of them ever thought of simply asking her. This next poem goes out to those of us who sometimes go over a little overboard in matters of romance. This is called Small Claims Courtship. I took the 27 bones from my left hand and made a xylophone on which to play you love songs. I dragged a wheelbarrow of sugar backwards over the parking lot so the ants could spell out your name. In your honor, I placed a respectable second in the county fair's eel eating contest. After my long-term letter writing campaign, Uruguay has agreed to reclassify you as its national fern. That easily blackmailed cosmonaut will be whispering blessings upon you when she faces Jupiter. A kindergarten in Duluth dreams only of your smile at nap time. I'd rather not say how or why. I've tuned the grackles to the key of your favorite jingle. Not perfectly, no. The world still fights me a little. Let's not even mention the angle of that cloud. I name my right shoe Twitter-pated and my left shoe hopeless before I circle your mailbox each night. My exhale is symptom and my inhale is remedy. This next one is a poem about taxidermy, specifically a category within the World Taxidermy Championships called recreations. And there's a little excerpt here from the World Taxidermy Championships rulebook that I'll read to you that explains the category. Recreations are defined as renderings which include no natural parts of the animal portrayed. For instance, a recreation eagle could be constructed using turkey feathers, or a cowhide could be used to simulate African game. So this is mating call of the recreation panda. Cleanliness is my only real fault. I could have done with a little faux shit yellowing my rump, something to make it seem like the bamboo I'm chewing will end up somewhere. I bear the bodies of 17 grizzlies on my back alone, peeled, dried, Clairol dyed, and quilted into the whole of me. I know that my ears were done with great tenderness, and one quiet evening, my maker even briefly held one in his mouth. That I have no memory is hardly his fault. I'm not even a ghost, since this requires both life and death as precedent. Says the poet, what is more precise than precision? Illusion. I am more precise than the clockwork of your own expiring mitochondria. Come closer. Try to guess the provenance of my claws. Gently blow the dust from the smoked snifters of my eyes. Imagine from what or whom your own body could be collaged, whose lips could be stitched into an homage of your smile. Take my lie in your arms. I forgot to mention before I quote a poet in this poem, the quote, what is more precise than precision illusion, is Marian Moore. And I think just one more poem. This is a poem about Batman. There is a new Batman movie out, but for the record, I need to say that the only Batman that I recognize is Michael Keaton. What a dreamboat. I know some of you out there get this. The real ones know. Dear Bruce Wayne, my parents are dead too. A dirty, self-cannibalizing Gotham. I also claim it. Its city limits built by my skin. I slough and slough, but the city remains. Tell me, if you'd watched your mother's face go a slow yellow after they cut off her breast, if you'd watched your father's mind get chewed down to spasms, who would you fight then? What broken string of pearls would you chase into the gutter? Lucky boy to have an enemy. Admit it. What bugs you the most about the Joker is his drag. You suspect his crayoned mouth a lampoon of your dead mother. But don't you crave sometimes to be a little tacky? Doesn't the all-black bore after a while? Even your sweet ride can't help but leave a little fart of flames in its wake. How many others glare from the shadows at a one-man parade in a loud costume, blowing glitter kisses at grim justice? You just think you want to kill him for better reasons. What kind of person would trade laughter for righteousness? Every woman goes out knowing what you think you alone had sussed. The world is a dark alley hiding a gun in its mouth. It has more than enough reasons to make you cover your face. The moon waxes. The bruise wanes. Every woman is Batman. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Nikki. That was fabulous. I'll move on now to our second reader. Hayan Charara is the author of These Trees, Those Leaves, This Flower, That Fruit. He was a poet, children's book author, essayist, and editor. His other collections of poems include Something Sinister, The Sadness of Others, and The Alchemist's Diary. His children's book, The Three Lucies, received the New Voices Award honor, and he edited Inclined to Speak, an anthology of contemporary Arab American poetry. With Fadi Joda, he is a series editor for the Atel Adnan Poetry Prize, and his honors include a literature fellowship from the National Endowment for the Arts, the Lucille Joy Prize in Poetry from the University of Houston Creative Writing Program, the John Clare Prize, and the Arab American Book Award. He lives in Houston.
Thank you. Thank you, Bailey. And I'm glad to be here and to be reading with Nikki and Brian. Nikki and I share an old press, and I'm glad that we are sharing this new one with Milkweed. I've been very welcomed and delighted to have my book come out through Milkweed. I'm going to read 4 poems tonight. And I decided to start with a poem that I teach at the University of Houston, and my semester is over officially on Monday. Today was the last day I met with most of my students, and I've been teaching at universities and colleges for 24 years. And over the last few years, I've started noticing that more than ever before, that the students tend to stay about the same age, and I keep getting older. This first poem is about that, not necessarily teaching, but about getting older, and it's titled Older. The dirt, damp with rain, is older than the sprouting grass, and shadowing the grassy spikes, the oak trees with brittle limbs that never fall on the mailman walking across the lawn are older than the house. And the house, in a neighborhood once a forest, is older than the boy and girl refusing to eat green beans. They love candy, but less than they love their mother. The girl is older than the boy. the boy older than the cat, and the cat, which cannot communicate what it knows about age, hates the cactuses on the windowsill. A conqueror in the night, he paws and breaks, then marches into the bedroom across my stomach and halts on my chest. His warm breath and wet nose, young as the new moon, barely a crescent tonight, 22 years after you died. Oh, mother, I am older now than you ever would be. The next poem, it is titled Apocalyptin, and it's a Greek word. It's the verb form of the Greek word for apocalypse, which is apocalypsis. And in Greek, apocalypsis means uncovering. And apocalyptin means something like to take the cover off. So in the strictest sense, an apocalypse is, even the biblical apocalypse is supposed to be about revelation, which is why we often refer to that book in that way. It's about revelation, even though that may come through destruction. So I guess the idea is, in those kinds of apocalypses, the religious ones, that, when everything is finally ripped apart or turned upside down, the truth will be revealed. And so maybe these apocalyptic messages we see in sacred texts are about, they may be bleak and catastrophic, but maybe we're supposed to also read them as reminders of maybe, how not to bring about apocalypses to people. So anyhow, this is called Apocalypse. It's in 13 sections. The sections are numbered in the book in actual Arabic numbers, not 1, 2, 3. I think you know what I mean. Like they're written in Arabic. I'm just going to read them. I guess I could read them in Arabic too. Wahid. The Arab apocalypse began around the year of my birth, give or take. The human apocalypse a few thousand years earlier. Nan. I earn my living teaching about the human condition, a composite of violence, vengeance, and theft, ingenuity too, and forms of love unique to men and women, the only species that knows consciously what others of its kind thought and did thousands of years before. Stories, myths, histories, philosophies, all mirrors and constellations showing humanity to itself, none of which will ensure our survival. Tlete. A mile and a half from the border, the Israeli border, Bint Jbeil, the small city my father left in 1967. Its orchards, hillsides, rivers, roads, highways, bridges, schools, houses, restaurants, coffee shops, pharmacies, hospitals, cemeteries, twice in his lifetime obliterated. Arba. The Arab apocalypse began in the 1950s and 60s in Egypt, Tunisia, Libya, Syria, and Iraq. The human apocalypse in 1945 in a desert in New Mexico, where scientists exploded the first atomic bomb. Khamsa. In Beirut, snipers picked off children sneaking to buy candy, yet the population grew. Sitte. In 1972, my father paid $9,000 for a house in Detroit. 40 years later, a foreclosure, it sold for $8,000. Its windows, doors, floors, walls, the porch, the mailbox, the tree in front, birch or poplar, gone. Now, weeds and bushes block the drive. Vines where the chimney once was creep over the rooftop. Sabah. In Freefall, an expert in urban decline describes Detroit's population. At the current rate, by the beginning of the next century, stray dogs will outnumber people. Man, soon as I earned enough to get out, I got out. Still, a street comes to mind. Forest, Grand, St. Aubin, Lafayette, or the bridge over the river to Belle Isle, or the tunnel lights before Joe Louis Arena, or disappearing in a rearview mirror, the horizon with smokestacks, which once upon a time I believed no other on earth could match in perfection. Tisa. The Arab apocalypse began on a piece of paper in 1917. The human apocalypse 50,000 years ago, when hunters wiped out the giant kangaroo. Ashra. In politics, practically nothing is new. 2,400 years ago, Plato worried about speech acts, what he called craft. The crowd swayed so easily by emotion and flattery, interest and advantage, the logical failures to follow. (11) Today, which poems will cause institutions to fail? Who worries about that? Nosh. I started counting in English again. The city was here when lust lured us away from the animals, when kings and the children of gods hunted side by side in the forests of lesser gods, when Priam begged for his boy's broken body, when Achilles, cruel and beautiful, chose death for glory, when Abram became Abraham and Muhammad heard God's voice in a lightning bolt. It was here, and the asphalt and concrete won't reveal what it was. The rivers won't either, or the trees, or the soot turning factory walls and lungs permanently black. Whatever it was, swamp, forest, glacier, it was there. Fletash. The apocalypse began with 1,000 hoofbeats across a field, men hollering, women wondering where to hide the children. Here, a mother said, we will hide in the earth. Our ancestors are already there. The rest will follow. I'm going to end, I was going to read 4 poems, but I'm just going to read one more, keep it at 3. This is a poem that, there's a guy named Bob in it, and we've all met Bob at some point in our lives. Hopefully we don't meet too many of them. And if your name happens to be Bob, I'm sure this is not about you. This is titled Self-Portrait with Curses at 35,000 feet. On a flight to Detroit, the guy next to me told me about his shitty job, his dumb, slobbering dog, his good-for-nothing kids, 2 of them assholes, and his lying, cheating wife. Moving at 500 miles per hour above the earth without feeling it, I listened to him go on and on Is pain bad to worse? To what wisdom does suffering give birth? And must we always learn from it? Earlier that morning, my mother had died, and going back to her once and for all, I would find out. But first, I had to suffer Bob. Fucking Bob. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Hayan. I'm thrilled that you read that one. Moving on to our last reader of the night before we shift into Q&A. Brian Tierney is the author of Rise and Float, which was selected by Randall Mann as the winner of the 2021 Jake Adam York Prize. That's 20/2021, not 2021, you know. His poetry and prose have appeared in or are forthcoming in Paris Review, Agni, Kenyon Review, NER, The Adroit Journal, and others. A graduate of the Bennington Writing Seminars, he is a former Wallace Stegner Fellow in Poetry at Stanford and a winner of the Poetry Society of America's 2018 George Bogan Memorial Award. He grew up in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, and currently lives in Oakland, California, where he teaches poetry at the Writing Salon.
Thanks, Bailey. It's an honor to be here with my fellow readers. We all know a Bob, Hayan. Fuck Bob, right? So I'm going to start with a love poem. This is for Jess. You're the one I want to watch the last shit show down with. Dr. Redacted will tell me not to tell you this, like this, in a poem. How it's all right, love, that we don't love living. Even actors don't exactly love the spotlight they move through. As your sister, the actor, told us, they just need to be lit for narrative motion to have meaning. As such it is with artifice and embarrassment. And I moved through fear to you tonight, where I had dreams a short nap ago about lines of poetry I struck through with everyday blues, month after month, in the dream after dream. An attempt, I guess, to forget if I could. Defeat sometimes is defeat without purpose. The news, at least, tells me that much. I know now, in fact, we don't have to be brave. Not to survive a night like any we've looked on together. Watching blue-tinted snow once in a Kmart parking lot's giant two-headed lamp. And my father, hooked up the street, no chance of waking. And as many years ago now as how much longer I've lived with you than without. Forgive me again that I write you an elegy where a love poem should be. So it's an honor to read here for Milkweed, which has just been amazing for the book. I'm reading from Rise and Float, my first book. You know, a lot of it has to do with memory and elegy. And I think is that with poetry, you know, poetry creates the page itself as like a plane on which elegy and memory can meet. Elegy being the desire to give language to grief. I mean, in its most elemental sense. And so they meet on that plane on the page, and there's something so interesting, you know, something deeply human that becomes expressible because of that meeting. And so a lot of this book, you know, convenes with ghosts, convenes with stories of experiences and people I didn't even know and wasn't alive to know, and then trying to synthesize them with kind of what I do know. One of them is my father, who I did know, and you know, was a believer, wasn't a Catholic believer, and kind of till the end. And you know, I'm an atheist now, but I admire that, you know, poetry is its own kind of religion, You know, it's his own spirituality. Took me a long time to kind of admit that, but this goes out to my father. The title is taken from To the Harbor Master by Frank O'Hara. To the reasoning of eternal voices, to the waves that have kept me from reaching. In the photo negative, the sea is light. Holding it, I think of your lung, and a spreading appears. Other winters. The drip that by the bed filled the Folgers can with shit every hour. How I read you the weather and Dharma bums. You said in time I'd understand Kerouac was unworthy of the Buddha. Then asked me to stop. By then you lost your right front tooth, which embarrassed you. You'd clear a corn cob as if playing a flute. Whichever side of your mouth hurt less that day. Which is maybe what you meant. The memory can be kind of accomplished. The chaplain tracing a cross of oil with his thumbs on your forehead. And your eyes following upward, his hand and holding, following, holding. Like a kid who believes he's watching a kite when he's watching the breeze. So I'll read a couple more so we can get to those questions. I'm going to read the first poem of Rise and Float, which is called Wormhole. And this is actually the last poem I wrote for the book, which Bailey will know. And I kind of just like, it actually was after it won the award, I kind of slid it in because I knew it was the last thing that I needed to kind of speak and kind of frame the whole book. And it was inspired, it was written during the first year of the pandemic when things were, as we all know, pretty bad, pre-vaccine. And I was watching, it came on TV, Donnie Darko, which some of you may know, the indie kind of classic that involves mental illness and wormholes, which is kind of, you know, the Einsteinian being able to pass through dimensions and time. And so it seemed like, you know, a really kind of perfect way to write the last poem for this book, which has to do with time and memory and death and presence and loss. So this is called Wormhole. All winter, the house groaned as in a very great depth, so that I often couldn't sleep. Then one day, as if the inverse of lightning, silence occurred, entrusted to the hour. I became each minute. I became every direction at once and fled from source in definite position and returned to my mother in plaid widow slippers, the blue flaking hallway at the end of which she'd wrapped gifts with the funny papers. And I felt again the weight of her life shaping my fate. When she paused, I paused. When she looked down, I looked as well down into the garden at the material consequence of a metaphysical truth. Memorial flowers we'd planted and left. These rooms will outlive you, I had told her once in spite when I was younger, not young. While she hung our shirts above and around the busted upright to dry in the sun of a perfect angle, in which to watch was to surrender metamorphic mystery, but equally fear. Having set aside tracks I could think of to be followed, future possibilities, arguments of a speculative nature, the roads with nobody on them, and no one to remember anyone who was. I walked into that garden. When I bent to them, the impatience soured and gave a small yelp. Some of them had names I could not take with me. Night fell. Treasure I thought at the outset was wholeness was not wholeness. The passing car went white as the head of a match and was gone. So I'll finish with a poem called Teletherapy. The light of that jet overhead is my mind I'm seeing, so scintillant, unreachable. I am never where my body is. The first law of dreaming is what isn't here isn't me. The second law is to show you what I see, is to show you how I feel. Aluminum siding, the color of my skin, and wrapping the duplex where I lived as a boy by the ruins of a bridge for what could not be united. The message is frail. When I check my phone to remember I exist and I shake it and shake it, I shake myself as if to clear the etch-a-sketch of my face. If I'm dead inside, how would I know? How would a bulb check its own filament? Thank you.
Can't type fast enough to list all the lines from all of you that I love in the chat. I think that is one thing I adore about the virtual reading, is that you can sort of be as profuse in your adoration as you want without actually interrupting the reader. So thank you all again for such a fabulous sequence of poems. Yeah, now we'll shift over to the Q&A portion. I've prepared a couple questions for you all. These are for everyone, not geared into anyone in particular, so please feel free to jump in if you have thoughts, hold dialogue. I am but here to deliver cues. So first off, something I've been thinking about a lot recently, and not just because of the title of your collection, Nikki, but I've been thinking about poetry's capacity for truth-telling. Some, I think, resist calling a poem or its narratives true, whereas some might describe it as maybe the most truthful genre there is. So I wonder where each of you lands on this admittedly quite simplistic scale. Yeah.
I'll start, I guess. So I think, I teach at a community writing workshop, and most of the, it's mostly non-traditional students. And so I usually give them the first chapter of Richard Hugo's The Triggering Town, which the title's a little bit dated in some of the language, but one of the things he says is, you owe nothing to the facts and everything to the truth of your emotions, which I'm paraphrasing a little, which I love. And so maybe it's a cop-out to say, like, there is a difference between fact and, like, whether that's autobiographical fact or that's kind of like literal fact, and kind of truth, right? And I do think poems reach at something and touch something that is, at least in my book, the way I feel about how I touch grief and elegy is, there's truth in it that maybe, how I hope, resonates with other people, that it can't be defined, right? It can't be looked up in a book or a biography. And so there's a lot of poems, for instance, where, like, people will be surprised maybe that, like, some of the characters in the book I've never met. They were dead before I was born. But there's a kind of, I hope I kind of bring them back to life. That's partly one of the purposes of the book. And the truth is the emotional kind of experience of engaging them as stories, as presences in other people's lives who I do know and who are important to me. And so truth, I don't know if there's a big T truth, but truth as different from fact, I think, is important. And poems kind of, they pry at that space and they complicate that space maybe sometimes.
The philosopher Harry Frankfurt has a book-length essay called Bullshit. And in this, and And it's a wonderful exploration of what the term means and what bullshit is for and its nature and so on and so forth. And he has this moment in the book where he's distinguishing between truth and bullshit. And he talks about how, or rather, with lies and bullshit, what the difference is. And what he says is that a liar cares very much about the truth, what the truth is. And that is why a liar labors so hard to conceal the truth. Whereas a bullshitter doesn't care what the truth is. The bullshitter will simply say whatever serves them at any given moment. So with that in mind, I like to think that, as long as it doesn't harm anyone, that poets can be liars, but they should never be bullshitters.
Mm.
I might just add to all this something I said earlier about the poem Apocalyptin. And when I write poems, at least, I think that, or I hope that I arrive at some kind of revelation, either about whatever I'm paying attention to, or about myself, or, if we want to call it a truth, about that, even if it changes after some time. So and I hope that maybe my readers as well, or listeners, re-experience something similar, that hearing a poem will maybe open up for them something, right? A truth, an insight, whatever it may be. I heard, I think, so I have a friend who's a poet, and about 12 or so years ago, we read together, and he introduced a poem. I thought, like, he could have just not read the poem, and I would have been satisfied with the introduction. And it was something like, this is a true story, unfortunately. And unfortunately, many of my poems are autobiographical, and the people in them are real, and the events real, but it doesn't necessarily mean it makes them any more authentic, or if others are writing poems with a little bit of bending of the truth changes that.
Great, thank you all so much. I think this segues nicely into another question I had, particularly about the number of voices that exist in each of these three books. I think you all engage with additional voices alongside the speakers, or sometimes as the speakers, in distinct ways. And I wonder, when you're writing loved ones, historical figures, literary figures, or maybe figures that are entirely invented, that exist alongside the speaker of the poem, do you feel a sense of control over that character, so to speak? Or is it something more organic, where the voice tells you what it's going to tell you and you just listen?
I don't mind jumping in, just because I think I had almost the same conversation today in my last discussion section at the University of Houston. My students and I we just finished reading an Italo Calvino novel, and I insisted at the end of the day that, look, whether you like it or not, you're all postmodernists, and at some point you, the author, becomes invisible, or the reader becomes the author. And we were just talking a great deal about how language, writing, words, the literature in particular, alters us, how we have, and like one of the central differences between poems, novels, stories, etc., and every other kind of writing is that literature insists on being interpreted in many ways. You don't want that with a stop sign. You don't want that with, laws. Historians and philosophers aim to have their meaning clear and precise, and they wanted to represent what they wanted to represent. Whereas I think poets, especially, but novelists and other creative writers, understand that they are, the minute their work leaves them, it becomes somebody else's. And that happens for the writers that I think of, and the memories I have, and the stories I've heard. And when they are with me and I'm thinking about them, they're mine, and I probably see them differently than the people who came up with them. and they're probably going to be read differently once I put them into words. So I'm quite happy being a postmodernist in that way and letting go of that burden. I do try to have a lot of control, as much control as I possibly can, but I also know that so much is just out of my hands. And when I can remember that, I let go. It keeps me a little bit less stressed out and anxious than usual.
For me, when a poem starts, it's often with a line, and I always find myself asking myself, who would say something like that? And so kind of writing the poem is partially just trying to get to know the voice of who would ever say such a thing. But sometimes also when I'm exploring persona, and even if I start out with kind of like a hint of confidence about who this voice is, it's always the most fun when inevitably it scampers away from you and goes, you thought, but no, I'm this other thing. And you have to kind of like scramble after it and go, wait, but what are you saying next? And so, I love both having a sense of control, but also then losing that sense of control. And I think that losing the sense of control is part of the pleasure of artistic creation, regardless of the genre or the medium.
Yeah, I mean, I kind of agree with that, Nikki. I mean, both of you are saying things that resonate with me, but yeah, there's a way in which the best stuff I've ever written is when it's almost like you black out. I don't know, this sounds very mystical, okay? It sounds ridiculous, but like it's true. You almost like black out, and then like I think of that the famous anecdote where like Keith Richards fell asleep one night with his recorder on, and he woke up and he'd written Satisfaction. And he's like, I don't remember writing it. And it's like it's got kind of energy where I feel like the poem takes over. I live in the Bay Area, so I went during the pandemic, it was like right in that little window when things were like great. We had the vaccine, everything was like, yes. SF MoMA had Joan Mitchell, and it was truly transcendent. I mean, it was just outrageously good. It like changed me. And they had this video, with an interview with Joan Mitchell from, I guess, decades ago. And she said, the painting tells me what to do. And I guess that's the shortest answer I have, is that there's a way in which I mean, we have to exercise creative, control. I hate to use the word control, but control to some extent at some point. But at the same time, the best things I've ever written are usually when I have no idea what's happening and like the poem seems to be steering, which again, the audience might be like, this is very mystical and ridiculous, but I think it's true. It's just kind of like language almost takes over and something beyond you. Mark Wunderlich's a poet I worked with. He said, the poem's smarter than you. And I think that's a great way to think about it. It kind of guides you. It takes you if you let it. The letting go is the Zen hard part, I think.
Yeah, absolutely. Letting go, can't do that. Also, does that mean Keith Richardson is today's Samuel Coleridge? Is Satisfaction our Kubla Khan? I don't know.
He looks as old as he could be, I guess.
Yeah, right? Yeah.
I mean, they both did a shit ton of drugs, so,
Yeah.
Perhaps Keith Richardson is a vampire that was Coleridge. Anyway.
Oh, he's a vampire, definitely.
Oh, well, he's definitely a vampire. We can all
I want to see this mini series.
Well, we can return to that at a different time. I would also like to ask you guys about, what I'll say is I think each of these books, though exceptionally distinct in voice and, textual landscape, there are moments, I think, and in some cases full poems of just complete adoration. I think poetry is more easily recognizable as the genre of grief, of loss, of pain. And but I don't know. I've been thinking a lot about a poem rife with love and how that exists in each of these books in different ways. Sometimes complicated ways, sometimes very, very, very subtle ways. So I wondered if each of you might speak a little bit about what path you find to the other side in a poem. the happier side?
That's a big matzo ball of a question, I think.
That's a matzo ball, definitely.
You think so? You could just tell me how to write a happy poem? Come on.
Yeah, okay, but that's the thing though. For me anyway, writing a happy poem is more difficult than writing a sad poem, and I like to think they've gotten easier as I've gotten older. As I've maybe become more grateful for my life, for the things that I have, for what life has to offer in general. So maybe check in with me in another 10 years, God willing, if I get that allotted to me, and maybe I'll say yes, now writing happy poems is the easiest thing in the world. Cheswa Milosh has this great line, Lord, how I loved strawberry jam. And just the whole the openness, the vulnerability, and the simple pleasure in that one line. Like, I really hope to get there one day. I think there is something about pleasure and joy and happiness in poetry that is, in a way, can feel more vulnerable to write about than anything else. So I feel like I'm still learning, but it's something that I would like to get better at. If I get better at nothing else as an artist, I'd like to get better at joy.
That's great. I love that line too. So I think in my most recent book, one thing I was doing differently than I was in the earlier books is and I think just this is a consequence of just growing older. I started paying more attention to my thinking self. I think I'm more thoughtful than in some ways, maybe not in others, but than I've ever been in my life. And just paying more attention to that. And that just has meant paying more attention to everything rather than just the stuff that maybe would compel you to sit down and write a poem, like grief or loss or whatever it may be. I have 2 young children. They're 10 and 11 now. When I started the earliest poem in this book, they were 4 and 5. They're beautiful, exhausting, funny, drive me crazy, like all of that. So I think just, again, paying attention has and thinking about the stuff that I've paid attention to has helped me open up a little bit more into what I write about. And the greatest compliment I got so far about this book was from a friend I've known since I was about 19. And she said, your book made me laugh out loud so many times. And that was for me such a wonderful thing to hear. And I'm glad for it.
Yeah, humor. That's something I aspire to, I think. I think that's one of the things I love about Gerald Stern is that he's so humorous, like there's a way in which like Stern can be so serious and so ridiculous in some ways, but love and grief, I don't know, they're related. I think they're related. And I have that line at the end of the poem that, for whatever reason, this is how it works, seems to be the poem that resonates a lot from the book in my experience thus far. It says, an elegy or love poem should be, but I kind of believe that elegies are all love poems, right? I mean, that's the thing. Like, I mean, they're not, because sometimes you can elegize somebody who you have a complicated relationship with, but I think love's complicated. So I think that there is a way in which elegy can be an act of love and is an act of love. And but the true kind of the ecstatic poem, the Whitman-esque kind of the universe flows through me and I am the cosmos, to borrow from a song I love, is hard to do. And I'm not sure that, I mean, maybe I get there. My book is, a lot of it is, certainly pretty dark and pretty elegiac and grief driven, but with death there's life, and that's the thing. I don't think they can really be separate. One of my favorite books ever is Ingrid Christensen's Alphabet, which starts with apricot trees exist, which I will get tattooed on my person somewhere one day. And it's just like, I think there's something about I was recently reading Donald Ravel's book, The Art of Attention, which came through that series of The Art of through Grey Wolf. And he talks about like you begin to see and then you continue to see. And there's something about the attention that is itself an intimacy. And to me, I think intimacy and attention and seeing the world, right? Seeing images that you then bring to people is like it's like a form of love, and it's a love that's deeper than just it's more species related. It's more like earthly than just I love the person I love, the traditional kind of love poem. And so I don't know. I agree with Nikki. One day I'd like to be there. And Hayan, I think both of you said like, how do we get there? I hope we kind of can write that joy, that love poem. I don't know that I have. Maybe I have to other people, but in my mind, it feels I'm just more drawn to the death poem. I feel like there are love poets and death poets, and that's a unsteady binary. But like, I'm definitely more the death poet. But again, I think elegies and love poems they're the same. They're not unrelated. I'll leave it at that.
I mean, those, Thanos and I mean, anyway, like
Mhm.
it's the most human thing in the world to be obsessed with the ultimate end of human life. So I think that makes perfect sense. If someone isn't obsessed with death, either they are, I don't know, too young yet to think about it, or I'm not sure what's going on there, actually, if someone isn't thinking about it all the time.
They haven't read enough poetry.
Yeah, right.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, we'll get to them. I love that the sort of takeaway from that from each of you in a way was even every poem is also about love, and also I have no idea how to love poems. Sort of in that same vein. Well, that brings us right to the end of the evening. How nice that we were able to end on that note. I want to say thanks again, everyone, for spending some time with us tonight. Thank you immensely to our fabulous readers. Thank you to our wonderful audience. Thank you to Claire, keeping it real in the chat. Once again, you can purchase copies of Real Phonies and Genuine Fakes, These Trees, Those Leaves, This Flower, That Fruit, and Rise and Float on our website, and I encourage you all to do so. These poems and many more fabulous poems are contained therein. And please do take advantage of our National Poetry Month sale for the few more days we have in this very special month. That is code Milkweed Poetry, all caps, mashed together there. Yeah, we hope you enjoy the remainder of your evening. Yay, poems.
Thanks
Bye,
to all.
y'all.
Good night.
Have a good
Good
one.
night.
Good night, guys.